I've always been the handle-it person. I keep receipts. I read contracts. I don't do drama, I do spreadsheets. So when my Uncle Len died last spring, I approached it the same way. List the assets, pay the debts, close the file. Len wasn't a warm man, but he was consistent. Birthday cards with no message, checks with the memo line left blank. He lived alone, worked in tech back when it was fun, and spent the last decade repairing old radios and arguing with customer service reps for sport. The executor called and said, "There's a storage unit, a checking account, and a server. A server. Like, an actual rack-mount server." I pictured some dusty beige computer tower. The executor sounded like he regretted saying it out loud. My first thought was simple. Sell it, donate the rest, move on. Money in, money out, tidy ending. That's who I was then. Calm, rational, emotionally restrained. A person who believed being responsible was the same as being safe. The storage unit smelled like hot metal and old cardboard. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were also grieving. In the back, under a tarp, sat a black rack case with handles, heavier than it had any right to be. It had a label maker strip across the front. Orion. Do not wipe. I asked the facility guy if anyone else had accessed the unit. He shrugged. Just you. We've had it locked since his payments stopped. Payments. That stuck with me. Len had been paying for this unit monthly, even at the end. I took it home because my instinct is always secure the asset first, ask questions later. My spouse, Marcy, watched me drag it into the garage like I'd adopted a small appliance with trauma. "You're not plugging that into our network," she said. "Of course not." I lied, then didn't. I set up an isolated router because I'm not reckless. I'm cautious in the way people are cautious right before they do something stupid. The server booted like it had been waiting. I'm not a programmer. I can troubleshoot. I can follow instructions. I can fake competence long enough to get in trouble. The server had a simple login screen and, annoyingly, a password prompt. There was a sticky note taped to the inside panel. If I'm gone, use the date. The date could have meant anything. His birthday, his wife's death, his retirement. I tried the obvious ones until the third attempt locked me out for 10 minutes like a scolding parent. I sat on the garage floor, listening to the faint whine of fans and feeling the first flicker of, not grief, exactly, suspicion. Len was a private man, but he wasn't a puzzle box guy. This wasn't sentimental. This was protective. When it finally let me try again, I used the date on the storage unit contract. It worked. Inside were folders with names like /build, /docs, /keys. There was a README file, plain text, like a note from beyond the grave. The README wasn't poetic. It was practical. It said, in summary, the server hosted prototype code related to optimization algorithms for supply chain routing. It mentioned a company name I recognized, one of those huge, bland corporations that ships half the stuff in your house. And then it said something that made my mouth go dry. If acquisition inquiry arrives, do not accept first offer. Minimum, $4. 2M. Contact, T. Wexler. For $0.2 million. I reread it like the number would change if I stared hard enough. We were comfortable but not wealthy. We had a mortgage and a daughter in college and the kind of retirement plan that assumes nothing unexpected happens. For $0.2 million was nothing unexpected happens in bulk. Marcy came out with a glass of iced tea, saw my face and said, "What?" I told her, carefully, like I was reading a weather report. Len left code, and a big company might buy it. For a lot. She laughed once, sharp. "Why would your uncle have code worth millions?" I didn't know, but the server hummed steadily, like it didn't care whether we believed it. The next week, I got an email from a corporate address with a very polite subject line. Orion asset. They knew the server existed. They claimed they'd been in ongoing discussions with Len for months. They offered to settle the matter quickly for $250,000, contingent on immediate transfer and a confidentiality agreement. $250,000 is life-changing money if you grew up like I did, where the phrase "we're fine" meant the electricity wouldn't be shut off. But compared to $4, 2M, It felt like someone sliding $1 across the table and calling it generosity. The twist wasn't the offer. It was the fact that they contacted me within days of Len's death being public. Which meant someone was watching. Either Len had been important, or he'd been vulnerable. Marcy wanted to accept. It's probably nonsense. Take the sure thing. I said, calmer than I felt. We don't accept the first offer on a house. We don't accept the first offer on something that might be worth 10 times more. I emailed back. Please direct inquiries to the estate's attorney. I didn't have an estate attorney, but money makes you brave in weird ways. I hired an attorney the next day, Carla, sharp-eyed, mid-40s, the kind of person who could make a billionaire feel like they forgot their homework. She read the email thread, read Len's readme, and then asked for something I hadn't considered. Do you actually own it? She said. He left it to me. He left you hardware. Code is intellectual property. Different animal. We need to see his employment history, contracts, anything that assigns inventions. I dug through Len's papers, mostly receipts and old warranties. Then, in a manila folder labeled medical, I found a stack of invoices from a private cancer clinic. Len had been sick, quietly, expensively, and there it was, the first major reframe of everything I thought I knew. Len didn't keep paying for that storage unit because he was eccentric. He paid because it was the last thing he could control while his body failed. He was protecting something that could have paid those bills, and he didn't use it. Or he couldn't. Carla's voice softened. These bills, he was hemorrhaging money. Marcy watched me shuffle papers and said, too quickly, maybe he needed help. I thought of all the blank checks and silent birthday cards. Len's version of love had always been money from a distance. And now I was holding his debt like it was contagious. Carla sent a formal response to the corporation. We were reviewing ownership and valuation, and any further contact should go through her office. 2 days later, someone left a box on our porch. No label, just a plain cardboard box, sealed with clear tape like it came from a moving company. Inside was a printed contract. Len's signature on one line, dated 8 months before he died. It was an option to purchase agreement granting the corporation first right to acquire Project Orion for $300,000. They'd raised the number by 50 grand, like it was an apology. The twist wasn't that a contract existed. It was that it was signed. Len, careful Len, had agreed to sell for a fraction of his own minimum note. Carla stared at it, then at me. This is either legitimate or very, very fake. I wanted to believe it was fake. It would have made Len the heroic underdog again, clever and stubborn. But the signature looked right, and the date lined up with when the medical bills spiked. Money wasn't just driving the plot anymore. It was explaining people. Carla hired a forensic document examiner. Legit signature. Legit paper. Legit ink age. Len had signed it. I felt betrayed by a dead man, which is a ridiculous feeling until it isn't. My calm started to crack at the edges. I'd built my identity on being the responsible one, the one who sees clearly. But here I was, inheriting a mess I didn't understand, staring at proof that Len had either panicked or been pressured. Then the examiner mentioned something small. The contract had a witness signature too. Witnessed by T. Wexler. Same name from the README contact. I Googled him. Tech lawyer. Big deals. Clean headshot. And in a press release from 2 years ago, he was listed as external counsel for the corporation. Len's contact person was their lawyer. Of course he was. Carla said, if they had an option, why are they approaching you with different numbers? I answered without thinking, because the option is shaky, or because it wasn't enforceable, or because Len had left something out. My restraint, my calm, felt less like maturity and more like fear wearing a suit. We brought in a software valuation consultant. He charged by the hour in a way that felt like a personal insult. He spent a day examining the server offline and came back with a careful, measured opinion. It's valuable, he said, not because it's a finished product, but because it solves a very expensive problem. If this performs like the tests suggest, it could save them tens of millions a year. Carla asked, how much would you pay? He leaned back. If ownership is clean, low single-digit millions isn't crazy. I felt dizzy, like I'd stood up too fast. Marcy squeezed my hand under the table hard enough to hurt. That night she was suddenly tender in a way she hadn't been in months. She cooked. She laughed. She said, "This could fix everything." "What's everything?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Your stress, the mortgage, Ellie's loans. We could finally—" She stopped herself before she said, "Breathe." Because admitting you're drowning feels like weakness. I wanted to believe her. Money has a way of turning hope into a plan. I went to bed thinking maybe Len's final gift was simple. Chaos first, then rescue. That was my false resolution forming quietly, like mold. Then my cousin Mark showed up. Mark is Len's sister's kid, and he has always treated money like it's something other people are supposed to provide. He walked into my garage, saw the server rack, and said, "So you found it?" My stomach dropped. "How did you?" He shrugged. "Len told me about Orion months ago. Said if anything happened, I'd get a cut. Said you'd try to screw me because you're responsible." Mark's version of reality always includes him being wronged. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread with Len. Messages about the company offer, the bills, and then, 6 weeks before Len died, "Mark, if I go, you make sure they pay. Don't let them bully my name." Len had anticipated this exact situation. Mark leaned in. "I already talked to Wexler." Carla's voice in my head. "Keep everything through counsel." Mark smiled like he could taste the money. "They said the option contract stands, but they'd be willing to sweeten it if we don't drag it out." "We," I said. He nodded. "Family." That word family landed like a threat. Mark filed a claim against the estate, alleging Len had promised him partial ownership. He also started calling relatives I barely speak to, stirring up a narrative that I was hiding a windfall, while Len's real family got nothing. Marcy, meanwhile, started Googling yachts like it was a joke she told too often. The twist in this part wasn't legal. It was personal. I found a second folder in the Manila medical file, payments Len had made to Marcy, not checks to me, to her, over 2 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger. Memo lines, consulting or help, were left blank. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She just went pale. "He reached out," she said. "He said you'd refuse. He said you always want to be the one holding the wheel." "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded thin. Marcy's eyes filled. "He was dying. He asked me to help manage some things. He said he needed a person who could be warmer. He paid me to coordinate appointments, bills, calls." "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "Because you would have made it into a project. And he didn't want to be your project." Money wasn't just corrupting people. It was revealing who we already were. Carla dug into Len's background and found the missing piece. Len had once worked for the corporation's competitor, decades ago, and the early version of Orion may have been developed during that time. If so, ownership wasn't just clean or unclean. It was a battlefield. That's why the corporation wanted a quick, quiet deal. Not because they were generous, but because they were afraid. Carla's strategy shifted. We weren't just negotiating price. We were negotiating silence. We drafted a counteroffer, $5, 5M, plus indemnification, plus a clause covering any third-party claims. We offered a limited license during due diligence, not full transfer. Wexler replied within hours. Unreasonable. Final offer, $750,000. Mark called me immediately after, like he was watching my inbox. "Take it. Split it. Be done." Marcy said, "Maybe we should." And there it was, the third major twist. I realized the pressure wasn't coming from the corporation alone. It was coming from inside my house and inside my bloodline, pushing me toward the number that kept everyone comfortable enough to stop fighting, but not enough to change anything permanently. I started to see the pattern. People don't betray you because they hate you. They betray you because they're afraid of losing what they think they deserve. I did something I'm not proud of. I accessed Len's email archive on the server. He'd kept everything. Years of correspondence, including threads with Wexler. There were negotiations, yes. There were medical updates. And then there was one email that made my hands shake. Wexler to Len, 9 months before Len died. We can't justify your valuation, but we can assist with your immediate needs. Let's consider personal arrangements. Attached was a private loan agreement for $100,000, interest-heavy, secured by Project Orion assets, with a clause that allowed the corporation to enforce the $300,000 option if Len defaulted. Len had taken a loan from them. He wasn't just negotiating with a buyer. He was trapped in debt with the buyer. And in the email thread, Len wrote back, "I don't want my name dragged into this. If I sign, you leave them alone." He'd tried to buy my peace with his own leverage. That recontextualized everything: the storage unit, the secrecy, the low option price. Len wasn't careless. He was cornered. I sat in the garage, listening to the server fans, and for the first time I understood something ugly about myself. My calm had always been a luxury. Len didn't have it. He had bills. Carla was furious in a productive way. A loan like that, tied to an option, tied to a desperate medical situation, could be argued as unconscionable, predatory, possibly unenforceable. We threatened to go public and to regulators. We hinted at litigation and discovery, the nightmare of internal emails. We didn't have to be certain. We just had to be expensive. Wexler changed his tone. He asked for a meeting. In the conference room, glass walls, branded water bottles, Wexler smiled like we were all professionals having a reasonable disagreement. He slid over a revised term sheet, $3. 2M, plus a separate payment of $300,000 labeled consulting fee to Marcy. My vision narrowed. Marcy's hand found my knee under the table. Too late, too familiar. Carla's eyes flicked to me, then back to the paper. She didn't speak. She let me feel it. The fourth major twist hit like a door slamming. Marcy hadn't just been helping Len. She'd been negotiating with Wexler behind my back, and they'd baked her reward into the deal like a tip. I stood up so fast my chair screeched. Wexler stayed seated, calm. "It's standard," he said, smooth. "She's been instrumental." I looked at Marcy. "How long?" She whispered. "I didn't want you to ruin it." Ruin it. As if my insistence on transparency was the danger, not her private paycheck. Money didn't just reveal flaws. It rewarded them. I wish I could say I handled it with dignity. I didn't. I walked out. I sat in my car and stared at my hands until they stopped shaking. Then I called Carla and told her, "Nuke it." We filed an aggressive notice. The estate disputed the option, disputed the loan, and alleged undue influence. We notified the competitor Len used to work for, because if there was an ownership claim, better to control the explosion than be buried by it. We also froze any estate distributions, which meant Mark couldn't touch a cent. The corporation came back, suddenly terrified of daylight. Final offer, $6. 8M. Clean purchase, no side payments, full release. They wanted it done fast, quiet, and with everyone signing. Carla negotiated it to $7. 1M and made the confidentiality mutual. Mark screamed. He threatened. He sent family members to guilt me. "Len would have wanted," he started, and I cut him off. "Len wanted you to make sure they paid," I said. "He didn't say you deserved it," Marcy cried. She apologized in circles. She said she was scared, that she thought I'd hesitate, that she wanted to secure Ellie's future. She said she didn't mean to betray me, like betrayal is something you trip over. The money hit the estate account 2 weeks later. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd been excavated. We paid Len's medical debts. That was non-negotiable. Then we paid off our mortgage. Then Ellie's loans. Every payment felt like crossing something off a list that had been running my life in the background for years. And then came the part that permanently changed how I see myself. I kept thinking the money would make me generous, softer, better. But what it actually did was make me honest. I told Marcy I wanted a separation. Not because I hated her, but because I finally understood what I'd been calling responsible. It wasn't virtue. It was control. And she'd learned to work around it with secrecy and side deals, because control makes everyone else a problem to solve. We're in mediation now. She wants to keep the house, says it's for stability. I hear asset. I hear leverage. I hear the exact same language Wexler used, dressed up in a different outfit. Sometimes I sit in the garage where the server used to hum. It's gone now. Wiped, transferred, absorbed into a company whose logo will never show Len's name. And I think about that sticky note. If I'm gone, use the date. I used the date. I unlocked the server. I got the money. I won. But I also learned that money doesn't just buy solutions. It buys access. It buys shortcuts around people's morals. It buys quiet. And if you're the kind of person who thinks you're in control because you're calm, it will teach you, eventually, that calm is just what you call fear when you've learned to speak politely. I don't feel lucky. I feel informed. And I don't know if that's worse.